citizen, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voice.
Welcome to another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast. And this week, we're going to be doing something very different. I'm Arthur Kanagas, and I'm here with Melanie Bennett, who is the producer of the movie The World Is My Country, and I'm the director, and we both also co-host this podcast. And the film, as many of you probably know, has been playing on PBS stations coast to coast. And as a result, we've had a chance to get some major publicity, and Martin Sheen has been helping us promote it on MSNBC, on Extra TV, on the Tom Hartman Show. And in that show, he mentioned, in fact, his idea of working with us on developing a series on Gary's story. Now, what happened is I had sent him a book by Gary called My Country is the World, a phenomenal book. If you get a chance to, in fact, everyone ought to read it, because the movie is just the tip of the iceberg for all the incredible stories in here. And Martin read it and he said, "Oh my God, Arthur, every single chapter in here is an episode for an epic series. This would be fantastic. It takes you all over the world. It takes you," at one point, after Gary gave Nehru the world passport, and Nehru said, "This is the passport Gandhi would have carried." Nehru's stint ran out. The personal visa he'd given him to stay 2 months in India ran out, so he felt he had to leave, and no money, so he walked from India to go to Germany. Incredible adventures going through Pakistan and Iran and Afghanistan, and unbelievable adventures. Here was somebody who gave up all the privileges of wealth and power. He gave up his national citizenship. He gave up a Broadway career that was booming. Everybody wanted him after he stood in for Danny Kaye. He gave it all up because he knew that humanity was in trouble, and he had to devote his life to making an example of himself. Einstein commended him for making an example of himself because he said, "I don't advocate that anyone else give up their national citizenship. Add the top layer. You can be a citizen of your city, your state, and your world. But I wanted to show that one person could live in a space above the nations that divide us, just to get our thinking shifted so we could realize there is that place above the nations that divide us." And he managed to live 65 years of his life as a citizen of no nation, only the world. So we think this is a phenomenal story. And the special thing we're going to do today is we're going to have, there's an opportunity that has been put out by CNN and the Film Independent collaboratively for a proposal to get into a special lab that will help put together a series, and starting with a documentary series. And so one of the things we want to do today is we have Gloria Borland, who is we'll be telling you in a minute about her and her filmmaking. But we also have Anya, who's joined us, who is another filmmaker. And one of the keys to Gary's story is that it really is a diversity story. That's one reason why we had the audience of a group of kids called Diversity Rocks from all over the world. Because although Gary, was an old white guy, he gave up all that privilege and was in 34 jails, loved to live among the immigrants and refugees of the world, saw them all as his brothers and sisters, had no problem with being put in jail, not for committing any crime, but simply for refusing to have national papers. And he did commit a major crime, a super major crime that troubled him terribly. He murdered thousands of people in Berlin in Brandenburg, near Berlin, by dropping bombs on them. And he says, "Why wasn't I arrested for that crime? Why weren't the people who killed my brother arrested?" And he realized it's because there's no law outside the nations. So he was not punished for that crime, but he was punished for not having pieces of paper. He thought that was so hysterical. He was a comedian, and he thought, he used his comedy skills as a stage actor and a comedian to help highlight the absurdity of this whole nation-state border system. So I think it's going to make for an interesting series. And one of the things today is we want to talk to, especially to Gloria, but also to Anya, about making films that break through some of that diversity barrier. Traditionally, the whole filmmaking establishment in Hollywood was white males and excluded, huge. And now we're seeing a big breakthrough of bringing people of all colors, races, creeds, all into all kinds of things in our society, but especially in entertainment. Gloria Borland, she in Washington D.C., she started a PBS series on Black businesses way before there was such a diversity of TV shows dealing with such kind of issues, and had a very successful series. It went out on over 150 PBS stations around the country. It was picked up by, Dow Jones promoted it, the Wall Street Journal. They were all quite enthusiastic about this. So we're looking forward to talking to her more about that. She also, she said she was also launching the Global Village Network, a cable TV channel in DC, and I want to hear more about that. And then also she's got some pretty cool projects in development. We'll let her talk about those too. But let's just get right into that. You launched this PBS nationwide series in order to profile Black African American businesses, in order to change stereotypes. Did it help do that? What happened? Tell us.
Well, I launched Global Village Network, which was an international cable TV channel. And I brought in programming, TV shows, and movies from Europe. And the European Union was just being formed in 1991. And I also brought in Japanese movies and TV shows. And it was for an American audience. And because at that time, Americans resented Japanese because they say, oh, they're buying up everything, right? So, and I grew up in Hawaii. So I come from a multicultural background in Hawaii. And so that was, and in the cable industry, I would walk into meetings and they would be all white men because that's the cable TV industry. And so they were surprised that the person behind Global Village, which is a very big vision, a cable TV channel, bringing in programming from Europe. I got, great films and movies from Europe, and I'm not white. So they were always surprised. So to change that stereotype, I created the series on PBS just to say I was really angry. So I just created it to show there are. Because at that time in the 90s, what you saw on TV were people of, if you were Black or brown, you were like, a prostitute or a drug addict or whatever, a criminal. That's what they saw on TV. And so to change that, I wanted to show successful Black business owners from around the country. And it had never been done before. And I created and I produced that. And it was on all the major big stations like WNET in New York, KCET in LA. So anyway, and the Wall Street Journal sponsored it a lot, as well as Coca-Cola. So, but it was basically just to change stereotypes. And Global Village, because the cable industry was supposed to go digital, but was still analog. And so it was I was only able to have coverage in the Mid-Atlantic states, Washington and Maryland, and I couldn't go nationwide because of digital capacity. It was still an analog business. And so now I'm relaunching Global Village on a digital platform on the internet, and I'm partnering with my daughter, and it's for millennials. Back when I had the original Global Village, only 4% of Americans had valid passports, whereas today it's 46%, right? And I'm bringing in programming from around the world. It's not, and it's for people around the world. So because it's digital, it's on the internet, it's TV shows and movies from around the world. Most of the content's with English subtitles, but it is for people around the world. And that's my passion.
Tell us a little bit more about that Global Village Network and the impact it's had. So as you get it out there when you had it in that Atlanta region, how many viewers did it have? What kind of impact did it have?
I had 1.4 million cable TV subscribers back in the analog days, 1.4 million. And, but it was the business model case was for a national reach. And the cable industry kept saying, we're going to be digital any day now, any year now. It turned out it took them 10 years to digitize, because back then you only had 30 channels on your cable system. Now you have a couple hundred. That couple hundred is the digital, but back then it was just all analog. But I wanted, what I'm doing with Global Village now, it's just a prototype. It hasn't launched yet. I'm going to wait until 2022 to launch. And but that's bringing in movies from around the world.
That's terrific. So specifically, when you did this series, was each episode a separate business, or what was your approach to creating a?
Yeah, I profile a different business owner from around the country. I produced probably about 50 episodes over,
Mm-hmm.
13 weekly. It was a 13-week series. I did that
For 4 years. Terrific. Right.
It was enough. It was enough.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't business 101 because that's boring. What I did
Right.
is I focused on the entrepreneur. What does it take to create a successful business? So it's a personality profile. What was your childhood like? Who were your role models? What obstacles did you have to overcome? So it was a personality, in-depth personality profile. Sometimes I did two, but the ones that were really interesting, I gave the whole show to.
Those were actually perfect questions that you just asked. And maybe we should just segue into that briefly. What was it? What was your background like? How did that lead to the kind of person you became? Maybe you could answer some of your own question right here for a moment.
Well, I started my first business. I've always been in media. I'm from Hawaii, and I went to college in Washington, D.C. And then when I was 21, I had this idea to be a magazine publisher. So I published at the age of 21 travel magazines in Washington, D.C. for the travel industry. So it's B2B. So travel agent, my audience for my travel magazines were, I was 21, were people twice my age. They were old enough to be my parents. The owners of travel agencies were mostly Jewish. So that was my demographic audience. And the advertisers were airline executives, and they were waspy men who were out, and so and this little brown kid from Hawaii. And then the magazine did so well, I expanded to Philly and then into New York. So I had 3 magazines in 3 cities, and I was in my 20s. And I traveled around the world writing about the travel industry, going to Kenya on safari, or the Philippines or Ireland, whatever, all around the world. And I think in my 20s, I went to over 50 countries for the business. So I had that platform or that foundation of international by being a magazine publisher, creating these travel industry magazines, talking about what travel agents in Washington, Philly, and New York needed to know about how do they sell Ireland, how do they sell Kenya, how do they sell Togo or Egypt.
So you were all over the world with that.
Yeah.
And then you also focused on a very interesting documentary series. Few people know that much. They know that Obama was born in Hawaii, but few people know much about the Hawaiian roots and how they impacted him. You also have a documentary in development on that. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Perhaps starting with the amazing story what you told about women in Hawaii. Let's hear about that.
People don't, the stereotype about Hawaii is that, it's backward, it's primitive, it's Polynesia, whatever. But Hawaiian society was matrilineal. And that what that meant is that property and chief titles went from the mother to the daughter. And so Obama was raised in Hawaii. Hawaii was the first state to have universal health insurance in 1975 when Obama was 13, and that is 40 years before the United States did. It's also like 30 years before Massachusetts did, right? So people don't know Hawaii's that progressive. It was the first state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment for women. Title IX for women, access to like all the Olympics, the sports, all those women athletes. Title IX was written the author was Congresswoman Patsy Meek from Hawaii. People
right, I remember her. Right.
Yeah, a very progressive place.
Yes.
And so that's what Obama grew up in. And when he was running for president,
and that women, it was just that 80 years before women got the right to vote in the U.S., women were already voting in Hawaii. That was way ahead of its time.
Yeah, way ahead. And so those are the things I wanted to bring out in my, it's still in development. It's an Obama documentary about how Hawaii influenced him. He would not have been elected to the White House if it wasn't for the fact that he was born and raised in Hawaii. And I show that. What people find appealing about him is from Hawaii. But the Chicago people surrounding Obama sabotaged me. I was in Washington putting this together. They branded Obama as Chicago, and they didn't want anything to interfere with that Chicago brand. So they did everything to stop my fundraising. They just sabotaged me. So I moved back home to Hawaii. I'm in Hawaii now.
Wow. So now is a good chance to bring it back where that obstacle, you talked about overcoming obstacles, and there's an obstacle that has probably gone away. And I think a lot of people would be interested to hear that story now. And I think it becomes very relevant as we're moving into a more multicultural era. So tell me a little bit more about, you also were involved in, let's see. Oh, I know. One of the key questions I want to ask you here is how, of course, the purpose of this People Powered Planet podcast is to talk about how we do what Gary said, how we create this interactive people powered planet where people are more involved. How do you see the story and the work you're doing? First of all, what was your reaction to the movie about Gary, and how do you see this fitting into what he talked about in terms of creating a people powered planet?
I think it's great. I understand. I enjoyed the footage. I enjoyed the archival footage. I enjoyed the story because there's a lot I didn't know about. 750, almost 1 million people were following him. I think that's amazing. But what I'm doing now is there are a lot of the largest as a boomer, I'm looking at the younger millennials. They're the largest demographic, and they're all on their little smartphones. And so what I see is, how to reach them, because they think that way. A millennial or Gen Z in San Diego, where you are, has more in common with their counterpart in Shenzhen or in Belfast than they do with us as boomers, right? So they really are interconnected, and that's what I'm driving my global village. That's why I partnered with my 19-year-old daughter as my co-founder, because to tap into that. But I think getting that, the millennial generation is the largest on the planet, and they think that way already. They interact globally.
Well, speaking of that, this is a great time to introduce Anya. Anya Profumo has actually specialized in that area. She worked on developing yarn. She's working primarily on Generation Z, millennial audience. She worked collaboratively with clients to form. She formed a production company, co-founded a production company, and a women's mobile media thing. Tell us a little bit more about you, Anya, about your background, Tunisian background, and how you got into your work, and about the work you're doing with millennials and with Z, Generation Z.
I started probably about 10 years ago, a woman-run production company. And prior to that, I had worked with Maria Florio at Earthworks Films on her documentary features. And she, as some of you know, is a very, very well-respected, fantastic documentary filmmaker. So I learned invaluable lessons from working with her and her film partner, Tori Mudd. And I worked with them on Tibet, Cry of the Snow Lion, which was about the Chinese occupation of Tibet. And then also on Big River Man, which is about a man who swam the Amazon. So that was just a wonderful experience. And then from there, I sort of got into writing. I started as an actor, so I sort of have this strong theatrical background. And my business partner and I, as we got older in the world of acting, got tired of the stories not catering to women as they age. It's very, very unforgiving, and sort of they just put you out to pasture basically after you hit 30. And I think it's sort of changing now, but that's something that we were really intent on being part of, a movement to sort of change that narrative. And as a result, we started working with various companies where we were developing and writing content for the younger millennials and then Gen Z as well. And that's sort of been this wonderful success for us. And we've had just a great time. And it's been very informative for us because the kids are on their phones so much. And so we've learned so much about that medium. And, a lot of our stuff is based in this sort of chat fiction realm. But it's been wonderful because I think sort of our mission in terms of like changing how media is influencing the world is kind of getting to people as young as possible and changing what like those stereotypes are and breaking those rules and kind of being able to bridge the gaps between, you know, the stories being like an all white family and an all black family and everyone's straight and everyone's this and everyone's whatever. I think now that things are getting turned upside down and we're getting a little bit more of a realistic view of what the world is, it's really nice to be able to create on the ground level of that. So that's sort of what I've been up to.
Yeah, I love that mixing, getting us out of the silos and seeing the families intertwined with all the different elements of generations and races and colors and the richness of our human diversity, not separated into their silos, but interacting in a dynamic environment. That's very exciting, which you've been working on. How now, what was your personal connection to Tunisia?
Well, my father is Tunisian, so I'm first generation on his side, and it's an interesting country because it's very underrepresented. And you know, just recently in the Olympics, when that swimmer, I don't know if you guys watched or not, but there was this Tunisian swimmer who like came out of last place and won the gold, and it was like such a big deal. Primarily just because, like, you know, like everyone's like, where's Tunisia? I don't even know what that is.
Well, in Northern Africa, we should tell people.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's just sort of been like, it's been an interesting thing because just seeing how, you know, Muslims and Arabs are portrayed has been rather frustrating. I have a friend who's also a writer who got staffed on a show finally that's centered around an Armenian family. And she's just so excited to be a part of that. But she has to, you know, every single person that is her boss is a white man. And she's like, I don't understand how this is a show about Armenian people, and yet all the creatives are white men at NBC. So, you know, it's sort of baby steps, but I'm just happy to like be in this world to sort of begin moving to a more like eclectic view of things.
Well, that question touches me personally. I mean, how can our film be about world citizenship and all the people of the world coming together? And, you know, Gary's a white male and I'm a white male as two of the key players in it. And that's why we want to do exactly what you're talking about, diversify. And as we move into the series, bring a diversity of people into roles as our editors, as our co-producers, as people who will help us shape this show, because the show should be shaped by the people of the world, and that's what we're all about. So that's very interesting that you've had a breakthrough step in stepping into the media doing that, and we want to continue that trend. Your father came from Tunisia in what year, and then when were you born, and have you had connections back there, traveled back there, or what's your ongoing connection? And was your dad Muslim and Arabic, or what was that connection? Tell us about that.
So interestingly enough, my dad is a Sephardic Jew, so he kind of like, I mean, he's the more fascinating character than I am, because he certainly has overcome not just growing up very poor in Tunisia, but then, you know, Tunisia was a colony of France, so he then migrated to France to try to get out of Tunisia, because as a Jew in Tunisia, that was very difficult for him because he's surrounded, you know, by a lot of Muslim influence, and there's just a lot of religious conflict there. But then moving to France, there was a lot of anti-Semitic stuff happening for him there as well. So his dream was always to come to America, you know, because he had this sort of vision of what America would be. And then he came here and sort of experienced, you know, everyone assuming he was Arabic and a terrorist. I mean, like, there are multiple times where, I mean, my father always gets stopped at the airport for random searches. Always, always, always. Like, I look pretty Caucasian because my mom is Italian. But my father, I mean, like, if you put a turban on him, you'd be like, oh, he's a perfect extra in like a weird, like 1980s terrorist film. So he sort of, but he just like persevered, and he came here and had nothing, and like became a teacher, and now owns 2 houses and is like the American dream, basically. And I just am so unbelievably inspired by him, and his tenacity and his, ability. I mean, I feel like his generation is just such a, I was born in the 80s, so I'm sort of like that older millennial. And I just think like we can learn so much from that generation, but we're not open to, like there's got to be a way that we can all kind of like learn from each other's various experiences generationally. And that's sort of something that's very interesting to me in the narrative space that I work in. So
it's a very interesting story. Did you go back to Tunisia? Has you maintained roots there? And have you had cross-cultural contacts and worked there with the Muslim and Arabic community, as well as the people of, what kind of Jew was it you said? The
Sephardic Jew.
Sephardic.
I have not been back there. He sort of like doesn't ever want to go back there. He has kind of bad feelings about it, but I would like to go because it's, first of all, beautiful, and I'd like to see my roots, and it would be wonderful to go. But no, I have not been yet. I have been to France. So his family all basically moved to France, and then my aunt lives in Israel. So, they kind of probably identify more as Jewish than even Tunisian. Like that's probably the core of who he is, as if you were to ask him. Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, I haven't been yet, but I certainly want to at some point.
Right, very interesting. Well, let's go back to Gloria a little bit more. So as you were developing this series on business owners, and as you developed this new program, this new series of global village television, what do you see as how the shifting world that we have has increased the prospects for a global village television network?
Well, one thing I like about Global Village is I don't produce anything. It's great. I'm just a programmer. So it's taking content from producers around the world and giving them a platform.
By the way, if anybody else has any questions and want to jump in, be sure to just raise your hand. I see Michael there with his Global Citizen shirt. And Michael has some exciting things that he's just been developing in terms of working in an interactive way to create a global citizen identity that rises above these nations that divide us. You're all talking about how do we come together? How do we just identify us at the global level as global citizens? Joanne, of course, has been doing incredible work, and Richard Denton, I think, has some big news about having a talk coming up with Shekhar Mehta, the new president of Rotary International, who very much loved the Gary Davis movie. He's in our podcast. If you go to theworldismycountry.com/Rotary, you'll see his podcast, and he's talked about how much he loves Gary's story and how we have to be citizens of the world. So this is a tremendous opportunity to get an organization with millions of people working with a global view around the world, connected with global citizenship. And I think Richard is focusing particularly on the nuclear weapons issue, because if we make one false step in the nuclear area, there's none of us to be diverse, none of us left here to enjoy our diversity and our richness of cultures. It's all over. So Richard's helping keep us all stationed here on planet Earth. Go ahead, Richard.
Sure. Thank you very much, Arthur, for that introduction. And yes, what we're working on is, of course, to have a world free of nuclear weapons by 2030. We're doing that by many prongs. One is to have a conference sponsored by International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the World Medical Association, the World Medical Students Association, the International Council of Nurses. So all the health people are coming together, the humanitarian aspect, to put on a conference with our RI president, Shekhar Mehta. And he will be speaking also with Peter Maurer of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and with Izumi Matsu, who is the UN Office of Disarmament. So 3 top people will be speaking on September 30th at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, which of course would be 8 a.m. Your time, Arthur, on the Pacific Coast.
Good. I'm glad it's 8 a.m., not 4 a.m. like some of these meetings.
Exactly. So we're thinking of you, Arthur.
Thank you.
And so this is going to be a great conference, and we're hoping to have Rotary International, of course, advertise it. We are coming out with a poster this week, and certainly when I get the poster, I'll share that with you, Arthur and Melanie, and that you can then distribute that as well. We're also working on the coalition of resolutions, or the Council of Resolutions, and having a resolution presented on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We're also looking for articles for the Rotary magazine, and we're also going to have a presence at Houston.
Excellent. I see something in the chat asking you about the Global Village Network. Do you want to jump in with that question?
Yeah, I have a prototype. It's just a prototype to show to possible potential partners and investors. So, because we're not going to launch until next year, but it's just to give a concept, so I can send you that link. But
and you have the previous shows that you did in the earlier incarnation when it was analog. Have you been able to get those, or are you working on transferring those to digital, but from the tape to digital media?
The content is so old; it's like 30 years old. The shows are so old. I have a link to some of to the sizzle reel. Besides just movies and TV shows, one thing about the millennials, they love festivals. So global citizen festivals, right? We want to be able to live stream festivals from around the world, because one thing millennials will do is before the pandemic, is they would hop on a plane and go around the world to an international festival. And so we want to be able to have a section for that too, live streaming.
Well, my connection to the group called Global Citizen, it has the major Global Citizen concert in Central Park in New York, and MSNBC pushes it widely, and they have all the top stars and musicians and so on performing. I found it very hard to connect with them. I wanted to get them to see our film. We're still kind of working on it, maybe getting them to connect with that, but it sounds like they might be interested in this festival idea. Michael, does that sound like a connection worth, I don't know if Gloria already has a connection there, or your connection might help her?
Yeah, sure thing, Arthur. I'm ready to be and try to get him on the phone and talk to him directly about that. He's the executive director of the Global Citizen Festival, and I think they're planning for relationships with NBC and other networks as far as the advanced shows that they're producing now. They had One World at Home production that they started doing. They had a special on TV with John Legend as MC, really nice productions that they're creating now. So I'm sure that once David, gets a little deeper into the story of Gary Davis and the near-full documentary, that they'll definitely be interested. So I'll definitely reach out to David and try to speak with him directly and get some direct feedback on what the process are at citizen.org.
And let's follow up on the email that I sent him about a suggested storyline for them to run in their newsletter about our film too. So let me turn this over to Melanie to coordinate.
Yay. Thank you, Arthur. Yes, we're doing a little different format today because of our deadline coming up, and so it's very exciting to have
2 days. In 2 days, we've got that deadline.
So we want to get to that a little bit more, but also Richard Denton, you have a question. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you very much, Melanie. To Gloria and Anya. One of the things, first of all, I'd like to compliment you, because I think film is a way to motivate people and to reach people. And being a gray-haired guy, I'm not into the social media as much, but certainly film is a way to reach people, and certainly I want to thank you and to use that. In Rotary, one of the things right now is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I was just wondering about your comments on that, And really, to me, while I think that is also very important, it really comes down to social justice. And so if you could just comment on how your films and what you are doing relates to DEI and social justice.
Well, I'm primarily like in the narrative space, so I'm a little bit of a green in the social justice. I mean, certainly it's something that's very important to me. I sort of like to use storytelling as a vehicle to just kind of get people. I think a big issue with most of what's eating the world away is just sort of ignorance about other people and other cultures and how we can understand each other better. So I attack that from a narrative perspective, which is why I'm in like the film and TV realm. But I think that there's kind of multiple ways that we can attack the issue itself.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That story is crucial, and I think there are. I think what's happening in the world, in all the divisions we have, everybody on every side of the issue is trying to do good. They're all trying to help their fellow people, but they have a different story, and one's operating out of one story. And so they're the hero killing the bad guys for that story. And the other is working out of another story. So they're the hero killing the bad guys for that story. And they're all battling each other around the world, all trying to do good. So all we got to do is get our stories straightened out. And that's why narrative is so important. What are the stories that touch millions and millions of people? It's these franchise huge, programs, whether it's something like Star Trek, showing what's one of the best positive ones that showed, for the most part, kind of peacekeepers traveling around the universe solving problems. But sometimes they also used violence in battles. But sometimes they were pretty inspiring. They had in Star Trek there was a federation of Earth, and we did have an Earth government out of San Francisco at that point. But we may put it elsewhere in the more diverse world as we emerge into a future interactive planet, or make it all over, a diverse capital of all of us, we the people. But in any case, yes, so story is key.
For social justice, I guess using the power of film is to change stereotypes, and also I do historical films, separate from Global Village, because I don't produce for Global Village. But when I do my own stuff, Patsy Meek, people don't know much about her, but she was a congresswoman from Hawaii, and she's the one that authored Title IX. Title IX is not just giving women access to sports, because right now, the U.S. Olympic team was majority women for the last couple of Olympics, right? But it's not only just sports, but it was also access to medical schools, because back in the 40s, they had quotas. Only like maybe one or two women would be admitted to med school or to law school. So she wrote Title IX. So if you are a college and you receive federal funding, you cannot discriminate against women. So that's a big social issue. That was passed in 1972, and it was written by a congresswoman from Hawaii. She's Japanese American. So it breaks the stereotype of the passive, demure, Asian, right? And she's a real powerhouse. So she wrote that, and that has changed. Like if you watched during the pandemic and you watch on TV, all these women of color doctors, these women physicians, if this was 20 years ago, they would have been all white men physicians. But now you see on CNN or all the physicians, they're women and women of color. So that's because of Patsy Meek, and that law passed in 1972. And this coming next year is the 50th anniversary. So I have a historical documentary on Patsy Meek and her effect. One woman wrote this law and opened the floodgates for women to have equal access, social justice to higher education that was denied them by sex.
Yeah, wow, my goodness. Thank you so much for that's fascinating. Yes, I didn't know that at all. So this is crazy how important stories are, and getting the information out there of actually our past. So yes, so now let's go to, let's see, Jack had a question.
Like I have grandchildren from 16 to 26, and And so I love the idea of honoring the past, doing good today as a group, and for the future of our children and grandchildren. So I like the long thinking, and even though we have millennials and Generation X and boomers and traditional, all of that I get. But it seems sometimes I have a difficult time. I mean, I have great conversations with my grandchildren, but they do see me as a white imperialist, privileged Rotarian, right? And so I need to, really engage in gender equality and social justice and how I view things, right, in my experience and there. So, and it seems in the educational system, there's been an intent to do some good things, I think, but it's also, I don't know, it's causing like this whole thing of tearing down tradition and really, I don't know, I just having a difficult time getting my head around where we're headed right now. And I'm so glad that you are doing film and different things that might address the idea of staying together. Like, let's make sure the family unit is still a pretty good thing, right? And yet there's an intent to tear it apart. Because if you tear a family apart, guess who does well? Drug dealers, alcohol dispensers, pornography. There's so many things that happen when a family in a village is torn apart and a young child is no longer encouraged and loved and educated properly. So I really think it is important that we're doing that we stay together in ageism and culture and all that. It's really important, the people-powered idea, really important.
Jack, I love what you're saying, because yes, family unit, but also the family unit of the world, staying together, and everyone not worrying too much about what age you are. I'm all about that. And I think it's so critical. Meet Up is that way too. You have all these groups, and you'll find in these groups, it's meetup.com. You'll find in these groups all different ages, all interested in what people who love dogs, who like to paint, whoever, and you're getting the people together rather than moving us apart. So yeah, I think we all need to be one huge family, taking care of the world and ourselves. So yes, thank you for those points. I guess we're gonna zip back to Arthur, and Arthur, for the close, back to you.
All right, so we're going to close the official meeting, and as I said, especially Anya and Gloria are going to stay on, or if anyone else wants to be key part of creating this actual program. But this is going to be sort of a nuts and bolts discussion afterwards. Let's give Gloria a chance to say any final words, and how can people get a hold of your material, and how can they follow up and be a part of what you're building?
If people want to contact me, my email is gloria@wetalkstory.org. That's where I produce my historical documentary films. Gloria@wetalkstory.org. There's a Hawaiian slang about we talk story. That's what we do. We talk story.
And what does that slang mean in Hawaii when they say we talk story?
It's like it's where people come together and they talk from their heart.
Anya, any other last thought before and how people can get in touch with what you're doing?
Mine's just anya@sidecarpics.com. I don't really have any final words, but it was a lovely chat and it was nice to be here.
Great. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead then and end this episode. We appreciate it very much, and we look forward to people joining us each week. You can sign up to be a member of our club at theworldismycountry.com/club. Thank you for joining us in another episode of the People Powered Planet podcast.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.